The following is the first of 5 videos criticizing the games in the Super Smash Bros. Series. I will be discussing the NTSC versions of Smash Bros. 64, Melee, Brawl, Project M, and Super Smash Bros. For the Wii U. The goal of these videos is to examine the decisions lead developer Masahiro Sakurai made, to speculate on the intent behind them, and to explore the results. This video in particular is meant to be not only a review of Smash 64, but also is meant to serve as an introduction to the series and its defining traits. This video is meant for people who have played the game beforehand, and the content will reflect that, so please do so before continuing if you haven't already. The Nintendo 64 released in 1996 with a unique controller that was built around Nintendo's jump into 3D gaming with their launch title, Mario 64. The game Dragon King was planned in order to create a fighting game that takes advantage of the analog stick's expanded range of movement. While it had a very similar set of mechanics as Smash does now, Sakurai and co-developer Satoru Iwata worried that a fighting game would be tough to sell due to the conflicting goals of having a playable roster of multiple likable characters and still having a mascot for marketing purposes. Sakurai quickly had the idea of pitting Nintendo characters against each other instead of making new characters from scratch. After whipping up a prototype, his idea was greenlit, and Nintendo All-Stars Super Smash Bros. Was born. Having such relatable characters was an extremely good move right off the bat. A well-known face sells quickly and easily, and the idea of characters from different franchises fighting each other was unheard of outside of the Marvel vs. Capcom series and Fighters Megamix. A secondary effect is that characters with pre-established histories make it far easier to design a character's moveset for the same reason that fanfiction is far easier to write than a story from scratch. Quirky design is more easily excused when it comes from these characters. While a projectile spamming character may annoy some players, no one questions why Samus had to have a moveset based around lobbing charged lasers, and people would complain more if Link didn't have the boomerang and hookshot than if he did, simply because of how iconic they are. It's very easy to find variety in the characters' playstyles, especially considering how various the characters themselves are. Virtually every character in the game has something completely unique about them. Donkey Kong can move around between grabbing and throwing you. Kirby can copy an opponent's abilities by swallowing them. Yoshi's shield is an egg, and it doesn't shrink upon getting hit. Link has a sword, and can pull out bombs that he can throw like an item. Ness can hit himself with his own attacks in order to help himself recover. Fox can reflect projectiles back, and so on. Even after you unlock Ness, Jigglypuff, Luigi, and Captain Falcon, there's only one true clone character in the game, and that is Luigi. Jigglypuff was based off of Kirby's character model, similar to how Luigi was with Mario, and like Luigi, it's clear that the characters were meant to be joke versions of the original, a trend that Sakurai continues in the sequel, Melee. Super Smash Bros. Is a unique series for 2 major reasons. First, it is a fighting game where 4 people can play at the same time. After a lot of digging, I could only find one other fighter to have ever done this before Nintendo, a Namco title called Knuckleheads, and it did not have a free-for-all option. The second reason is the lack of health bars and the implementation of a knockback system. The original inspiration for Smash was a Japanese game called Ohajiki, where you bump flat, round bits of plastic or glass into each other. It's easy to see the comparison. You're meant to use your character to launch the other character far away from you. Like the game Marbles, the goal is to knock your opponent outside the arena, which is a box slightly past the border of the TV screen. This becomes more interesting with the percent system that ties it all together. The first time you hit someone, they're not likely to go very far, because knockback is proportional to how high their percent is and the strength of your hit. The more you hit them, however, the further they will go. This makes every individual life very dynamic. It is usually better to use attacks that keep opponents close when their percent is too low for you to be able to KO them, and at high percents it is better to start going for smash attacks. A lot of Nintendo games are platforming focused, so it's very fitting for their fighting game to have platforming elements to it as well. The benefits and strengths of this system goes even further than mechanical depth, however. Sakurai intended first and foremost for this to be a fighting game for a far less hardcore audience. In this I believe that he succeeded spectacularly. Some may cite the competitive Smash scene as an argument against Super Smash Bros. Being a great casual game. The distinction I'd like to make clear is the difference between a skill ceiling and a skill floor. A skill floor is the minimum amount of technical skill required to play the game competently and enjoy yourself. A skill ceiling is the most technically a game can possibly be played. A game is able to be both a great competitive and casual game when it has both a high skill ceiling and a low skill floor. Smash 64 manages to have both a decently high skill ceiling and an incredibly low skill floor. This is due to multiple factors. The idea of knocking an enemy off the stage is very intuitive and easy to understand. Someone who has never played a video game before could likely look at a game of Smash and understand very quickly what the goal of the game is. There's also a psychological factor for the player who is losing. It is less stressful to be at a high percent than it is to be one hit left in a different fighting game, because even at an insanely high percent you can still survive many attacks in the game. It also fits the Nintendo brand better to have Mario disappear from the side of the screen rather than to crumple on the ground when his HP bar hits 0, which would honestly look quite grim. Even the controls themselves are incredibly intuitive. Attacks are done by tilting the stick in a direction and either pressing the attack button or the special button. Attacks consistently are designed to throw hitboxes in the direction the stick is pointed. Up special in particular is quite brilliant, because it is almost always a move that launches you upwards to save yourself from falling. Having the input be so intuitive is very important because a player offstage is very likely to be panicking if they're inexperienced. This compares to other fighting games where an attack often is much less intuitive. For example, Ryu's Shoryuken involves pressing right, down, diagonally down, and punch, while the character himself is lunging upwards. In Smash, Mario has a very similar attack, and all you have to do is press up and B. Other ways that Sakurai used the mechanics to reinforce a friendly environment was the inclusion of 4-player free-for-all, with items turned on as the encouraged way to play. Free-for-all makes gameplay chaotic, and is an excellent equalizer. As a player wins more often, other players are more likely to gang up on them and to stop them from getting first place. It's also impossible to account for the actions of 3 players at once all the time. Items appear randomly, often have random effects, and are very strong. Even the best player could lose a game just because all the best items appear in front of someone else. The hammer and Pokeballs in particular are so overwhelmingly powerful, they can easily win one player a match even if they had no kills from any other source. While the goal is admirable, the hammer in particular is not very fun to any player except the one who picked it up, since the next 10 seconds is spent running away from the player with the hammer. It would be somewhat excusable if you could turn the item off, but the item switch isn't even available until at least 100 versus matches occur. This is an example of Sakurai betraying his assertion that he wants people to play the game however they want, and showing his true vision for the way the game is meant to be played after all. When it comes to match types, more options is almost always better, and the fact that no matter what there's always the risk of this quite frustrating item appearing is a big problem, since the only way to deal with it is to just ignore it until you've spent the hours necessary to turn it off. Besides items as a crutch for low-level players, it is also true that every character is given a single attack that is easy to use just by throwing it out into a crowd of 3 other players. Pretty much every Day 1 Link abused his down air and up special relentlessly. Every Kirby made use of the invincible stone form on unsuspecting victims down below. And to this day, landing a Falcon Punch is still a deeply satisfying experience. All of these moves share 2 attributes. They are very strong, and they lock you into a long animation afterwards where you can easily be punished. There was a very concerted effort to avoid a dominant strategy with any character. While an attack might be very useful when catching people by surprise, a player always has many options that directly counter an ability being used. In a way, the game is a very complicated, weighted game of rock, paper, scissors, with rock being attacking, paper being shielding, and scissors being grabs. If you hold shield too often, you're likely to get grabbed, since grabs ignore shield. If you throw out attacks too often, a patient player is likely to shield your attacks and punish you for being predictable. If you're constantly fishing for grabs, however, you're likely to lose to an aggressive player who throws attacks in your face. Balance was clearly very important to Sakurai during development. He himself said, "I try to make it so that if you're good at competing, you won't be able to use the same pattern or strategy to win against a player consistently." However, even at the lowest level, some defensive options are much worse than they should have been. Getting hit while on shield puts you in an absurd amount of shield stun, which is a delay until you can act after blocking an attack. Rolls as well are very short and have a lot of lag frames, making punishing a roll on reaction very easy. Despite this, level 9 CPUs seem to think they're pretty good, so what do I know. The AI is notably pretty bad, which is probably at least partially a limit of the Nintendo 64. They almost never use aerials and grounded opponents due to their general inability to short hop. They are also incapable of seeing active items like mines and Pokeballs, and each character is often scripted to spam a particular move. Another huge problem is the lack of options when in the air. Of the 12 characters, only 4 have a way to quickly get to the ground, and all these options are very unsafe on shield. The rest must use their slow down airs and hope that a fox or falcon doesn't get under them, because getting juggled is very easy in this game. Combine it with how slow and floaty most of the characters are when in the air, and there's a reason most players tend to stick to the ground. This is really unfortunate because Smash 64's vertical design is what makes it so unique. Most other fighting games orient the player in relation to their opponent. Forward is whatever direction moves you towards your enemy, and backwards is away. Stages tend to be very small and have no verticality to them whatsoever, and platforms are all but unheard of, which was okay because all that mattered was your opponent by design. Compare that to stages in Smash 64, which are incredibly diverse and vertical. The nature of the game makes it that there's a huge difference in horizontal and vertical length, shape, amount of platforms, distance between the stage and the blast zone, and stage hazards. The versus stages in Smash 64 are often very large, usually asymmetric, and always have at least one dynamic piece to them. They have a huge amount of variety to them, which is important to keep the gameplay feeling diverse when the players are too low level to mix up their strategies that much. It makes the players feel the need to be creative, which then makes the match feel more exciting for everyone else. With that said, a lot of the stage hazards can be pretty annoying, especially Brinstar, which can disrupt an exciting match with as many as 10 seconds of getting juggled by acid. As a child, I'd always been a fan of Sector Z, liking the idea of standing on a massive ship as I fought, but in retrospect the stage is a bit too big, with the fin being so tall that not all the characters can even get to the top of it using only their jumps. Nowadays, I tend to play the game on Dreamland, which has the least interference stage hazard and a nice balance to it design-wise. I'll also often jump to Hyrule as well, mostly when I want to try complicated combos, usually to complete failure. Sakurai clearly loved filling his games with little details that you were meant to find over time as you continued to play. For a few examples, Jigglypuff, the balloon Pokemon, instantly dies if you pop her shield. Also, if you press down B while her character model is inside her opponent's, they take a huge amount of knockback. This is common knowledge now, but back when it was released it was not very well known. If you press Z after throwing an aerial right before you hit the ground, you cancel out of the ending animation upon landing. This technique is called Z canceling. As you unlock characters, the opening credits changes to reflect that. If you manage to beat story mode with every starting character and play versus on every stage, then you unlock the Mushroom Kingdom. Luigi's taunt even has a hitbox. Sakurai definitely wanted to keep a sense of wonder and discovery in his games. While Smash 64 has by far the least content to discover, he clearly believed in this game to the point where he created a website called Smash Dojo devoted to sharing his secrets. With all that said, I cannot help but feel that this game suffers from a severe lack of content. Charitably, I might suggest that it was held back by the limited cartridge system of the Nintendo 64, but more than likely I suspect Sakurai was given a very limited budget and a tight release window. There are only 8 default stages and a 9th unlockable. There's a lot of proof online of characters being planned for the game that never ended up making it in. This includes Bowser, Mewtwo, Marth, and King Dedede. It's a shame these characters didn't make it in, but since Super Smash Bros. Was an unproven property, it does make sense that Nintendo wouldn't offer the team infinite resources. Originally, the game wasn't even meant to be released outside of Japan, so it goes to show how little Nintendo knew of the impending success of the title. Once you unlock the 4 main characters, which can take all of an hour, there's actually very little progression in the game outside of unlocking the item switch and Mushroom Kingdom, which combined takes 5 times that amount. Outside of those stages, there's one player mode, where you can go through a series of set challenges. First mission, they set you against Link, who doesn't really fight back and exists only to allow you to get acquainted with the character's moveset. This is pretty important because this is often how a player will try to learn a new character. Having a ragdoll to smack around is very useful when you aren't sure how your character's moves work. After Link, the challenges are multiple Yoshis, Fox on Sector Z, a 2v2 against the Mario Brothers, Pikachu on Saffron City, a 3v1 against a very large Donkey Kong, a battle against multiple Kirbys with all the copied abilities, Samus on Brinstar, Metal Mario, the Fighting Polygon Team, and Master Hand. As you get further into the missions, the settings and opponents get much more grim feeling. After Samus on Brinstar, you have to fight a voiceless Metal Mario in a dark cavern, a team of 30 abstract polygon versions of the playable characters, and Master Hand. I do really like the concept of Master Hand. It's fair to say he's a very Nintendo boss fight. What I mean by that is Nintendo has an eye for abstract images that are absurd if considered rationally, but make perfect sense in the imagination. The context of the characters beating each other up is a young child playing with his toys. As the hero goes through darker and tougher trials, finally he gets to do battle with his master, who is apparently the kid himself. Having a toy fight against your hand sounds silly, but through the eyes of a child I'm sure it makes perfect sense. When I was very young I used to stage sword fights between my hands with pencils as the blades. While in real life I'm sure I looked very silly, in my mind it was as exciting as a battle between Mario and Master Hand looks hurtling through space. I'll admit I don't really know how the Polygon team fits with the metaphor of playing with toys, but since this takes place in the imagination of a kid, it doesn't really have to make all that much sense. I particularly like the shot in the opening credits of the young child's desk, where it turns instantly into an arena. It does a great job of setting the scene visually. I'd also like to go ahead and mention that for the rest of the series, not once is the enthusiasm met in the announcer's cry of In between the fights are the Break the Targets missions, Board the Platforms, and Race to the Finish. I'm a huge fan of the Break the Targets missions. Each one is unique to the character you're playing, and stresses your understanding of the character's abilities. Pulling off a target test at max speed can be very fun, and are a great example of self-imposed challenges that enhance a regular challenge. Board the Platforms is pretty alright as well, though is in my opinion inferior since it only stresses your platforming ability, while the target test challenges both your platforming ability and your understanding of your character's moves. Race to the Finish is not nearly as compelling as target test to accomplish quickly, due to the ludicrously high time limit and no option to attempt it outside of story mode. I have never once come close to failing Race to the Finish. I really wish the challenge had a lower timer and graded you for how far you went as the obstacles got increasingly difficult. On an unrelated note, I'm very surprised that since there was a giant Donkey Kong mission, there were no settings to make your characters giant as well. I suspect that there was a Mario Mushroom item planned, but the limited memory made switching models and physics variables on the fly too difficult. Visually, the game doesn't hold up to other Nintendo 64 games of the time, which probably was necessary for the game to be able to process the physics, items, and 4 playable characters, all at 60 frames per second. Despite this, it's still impossible to ignore how hard the game can be to look at. Many of the stages in particular look very poor, with the worst offender being Yoshi's story, which is a visual mess that has the unfortunate combination of being not very fun to play on due to the clouds giving some characters huge advantages, while putting Link in a position where he cannot recover from the right cloud if the player is ready for it. Peach's castle as well looks pretty poor compared to the castle we have in our head from Mario 64, which is on the same console. I do really like the looks of Saffron City and Hyrule Castle, which strike a nice balance between setting and stages that are fun to play on, assuming you aren't Ness. The sound quality on the other hand is immaculate, with the crowd reacting to what is happening being a particularly genius touch. The songs are upbeat and quite catchy. Dreamland is a particularly infectious tune. It's a tragedy that the training mode theme never comes back in other games because it has a nice balance between being upbeat and relaxing. Even the main menu music has a nice low-key ambience to it. Apparently the Japanese version has more realistic hit sounds compared to the cartoony smacks in 64. I can't actually decide whether or not I like them, and mostly I'm just experiencing cognitive dissonance hearing those sounds, so I'm just gonna stop listening to them. Once you play any game long enough, there comes a time to decide whether or not you're looking to move on to the next game, or if you want to try your hand at taking the game a bit more seriously. I had at one point said that 4-player free-for-all was a grand equalizer as far as player skill goes, and that is true. But casual play is also another kind of equalizer. It raises the minimum amount of enjoyment possible for a game. To put it differently, to play a game with your friends is inherently fun, even if the game itself wouldn't be otherwise. To prove my point, all I have to do is direct you towards the Mario Party series, which when played without friends can be one of the worst games of all time, and yet people seem to enjoy spending dozens of hours on it as long as 3 people are there with them. A game played casually with friends is very good at allowing a player to not think critically about it, and there's nothing wrong inherently with the goal of making a game for that general purpose. At the end of the day, once the atmosphere of jolly cooperation wears off, it's impossible to ignore that some games have no depth beyond that casual level. Party games have a habit of losing their charm over time, because the worst of them are nothing more than a bag of tricks for you to be surprised by. Once you have seen what there is to be seen, you're likely to discard the game in favor of something new. This is the reason we are, at the time of this video, at Mario Party 10. Super Smash Bros. Luckily has more depth than a simple party game, and so to this day each of the games has a group of people who still play them. This is due to the intrinsic advantages of multiplayer game design. A huge problem presented by most games is solved, the problem of longevity. What do you do when you've mastered a game's mechanics? It doesn't take a huge amount of time to get so good at most games where even the toughest challenge can be accomplished with ease, and so your choices include learning a new game, getting into speedrunning, or playing a competitive multiplayer game. While carefully balanced scaling difficulties and DLC packs can take a game very far, It takes an exponential amount of work from a developer and money from a consumer to continue to satisfy a statistically diminishing demographic of players who choose to master your game. Playing against people is exciting because it can give many games an infinite amount of content with no extra work from the developer. Compare that to single-player games, where a developer has to tailor the interactions of a game to a much larger audience, and the advantage becomes clear. If a single-player game is like a book written to say something general for many people, competitive multiplayer games are like a conversation, and when you're both challenging the other, that conversation can become very interesting. This is why competitive games are inherently fun. Whether a game has very elegant and adequately complicated and nuanced rules, or is lazily put together, has poor balance, and has a low skill ceiling, the act of getting into an opponent's head and trying to come out on top is a very exhilarating experience. The reason I say this is to be very clear that when I criticize a game, I'm not saying that anyone is wrong for enjoying competition. All of the Smash games are quite good, but that doesn't mean that there aren't major flaws that can be talked about, and while from a competitive standpoint it is counterproductive to complain about aspects of the game that cannot be changed, from a critical standpoint it is important to recognize ways that a game can even competitively fall short. Competitive Super Smash Bros. 64 is played with 5 stocks on Dreamland, and occasionally Congo Jungle, Peach's Castle, and Hyrule Castle, though the latter 3 are officially banned. All characters are legal, though certain colors on Congo Jungle are deemed too dark to be easily seen, and so generally unfair. Sets are played 2 out of 3, or 3 out of 5 if you're in top 8 of a tournament. When watching a competitive Smash 64 game between 2 competent players, 2 things become very quickly apparent. First is that combos tend to be massive, and that a lot of the time there aren't any options to get out of them. This is mostly due to the amount of hit stun on attacks. Hit stun is the amount of time where a character isn't actionable after being hit with an attack. If, say, Fox hits Luigi with a down tilt, and then manages to land an up air before the hit stun runs out, there's nothing that Luigi could have done after the down tilt to avoid being hit by the up air. It was a true combo. Every character has a multitude of true combos that can lead to 0 to death on most, if not all, the cast, though for some, those combos are more situational than others. Samus in particular struggles to link together hits due to her poor airspeed and general lack of aggressive close-hand options. Kirby, on the other hand, has combos that are incredibly easy to use even if you're a first-time player, and is for that and many other reasons considered to be one of the best characters in the game. There is a mechanic that makes it possible to escape combos, one called Smash Directional Influence, or SDI. Whenever you're hit with an attack, you and your opponent enter a short state called hit lag, where you both freeze for a few frames. This works as both a visual effect to give hits a feeling of weight to them, and also a moment for you to input SDI, which will shift you ever slightly towards the direction you move your stick. This exists so things like jab combos and down air chains do not work infinitely, which would obviously be pretty unfun to a low-level player. This mechanic is very useful in competitive play, but it does seem pretty limited to me, being virtually irrelevant in many 0-to-death combos. Perhaps this is just retrospect talking because I'm aware of solutions presented in later games, but it seems to me that if a mechanic is useful at escaping combos with a certain kind of move, in all probability most high-level play will find itself learning as many combos as possible that cannot be escaped through these means. Captain Falcon in particular is such a popular character due to the fact that none of his attacks are multi-hit, besides his rapid jab, which is useless anyways. This makes him one of the best comboing characters in the game. With that said, moves like the multi-hit down air is often still used, especially for edge guards and shield breaks. If you combine the high hit stun in attacks and high shield stun, you as a player face a major quandary. If you shield an attack, there's always the possibility that the stun on that attack can lead to inescapable shield pressure that results in your shield breaking. When a shield breaks in Super Smash Bros., you're left stunned for upwards of 10 seconds, leaving the player ample time to use whatever move or setup he wishes. If you get hit without shielding, however, this can lead to a quick death with very little counterplay involved. I had before said that the 3 major mechanics of Super Smash Bros., shield, attack, grab, are like rock, paper, scissors. This is of course a major oversimplification of how things work. For example, if you space an attack on shield, you can gain positional advantage, and if you grab fast enough, the hitbox can beat out that of an attack's. But let's posit for one moment that it was rock, paper, scissors for the sake of argument. The fact that attacking, rock, is a much better option than shielding, paper, has a secondary effect. Since paper is not likely to be used very often, scissors, or grabbing, becomes a less viable option by result. Grab does have a lot more utility than it could due to the fact that it has priority over hitboxes. What this means is, if I throw an attack, and you throw a grab at the same time, the grab wins in the end. Grab animations are also very quick, and throws very powerful, making it still ultimately worth it to go for grab in neutral game. What I mean when I say neutral game is the time when two characters have no advantage over the other. This is usually identifiable by two characters dancing around each other and fishing for hits. When a player finally lands a hit, he enters what is called the punish game, where it's up to the player to keep his opponent at a disadvantage for as long as possible, usually by stringing together a long combo. The punish game ends when you reset back to neutral, or a stock is lost. Smash 64 played optimally usually has a very campy neutral. Both players will throw out Z-cancelled aerials and keep distance from each other while threatening each other's space. Usually, a player takes a risk or makes a mistake, and then the punish game starts, often leading to death. The problem with this playstyle is that once proficiency is reached in the game, often the virtue being tested the hardest is patience rather than cleverness. While there is no timer in the game, the official rules state that a match is to be played a maximum of 10 minutes, and the winner is judged by stocks and percent. No player wants every 64 match to last 10 minutes. The problem lies in that it is usually incredibly risky to approach a camping opponent, and incredibly safe to camp yourself. The game becomes about who wants to put themselves at risk first, which is both frustrating to the player and the audience. It is not fair to judge a game by how entertaining it is to watch as a third party, but I feel compelled to mention that a competitive scene has a very hard time growing when it looks boring to the audience. The top level of play can be a huge turnoff to a lot of potential players, and this undoubtedly hinders the competitive scene, where the largest tournament ever was 1/7 the number of players compared to Melee. In whatever case, while the neutral game can at its worst be very tedious, the punishes can be very satisfying to land. It can be fulfilling to practice a combo for hours on end and for that practice to translate into actual gameplay. Edgeguarding is probably the most interesting part of competitive play. When off the stage you are at a severe disadvantage, and have only a handful of ways to get back on safely. Take this fox getting edgeguarded by Mario. Mario has the option to cover a high recovery, but he has to commit to it. If he, however, makes this decision, and Fox chooses to recover low, Mario doesn't get the edgeguard and loses his advantage entirely. Mario can of course stick to the stage and maintain his advantage, but then misses an opportunity to kill the fox. At higher percents, Mario may only need to grab ledge, and he's guaranteed the kill. These are a few options named in a complicated flowchart of character matchups, knockback angles, percents, and recovery options that I do not know nearly well enough to cover in its entirety. It's a very delicate balance and probably the most unexplored part of the experience for most casual players, which is a shame. Not every edgeguarding situation can be nuanced, of course. The characters are far too diverse for there not to be one-sided matchups. Ness, for example, has a very large double jump and a very unique concept to his recovery, but with a huge flaw. Ness recovers by hitting himself with his up special, which you can control while floating in midair. If another character is near enough, however, all they have to do is jump out and get hit by the attack, and Ness will fall to his death. Similarly, characters like Link, Captain Falcon, Samus, and Donkey Kong have incredibly poor recoveries, especially compared to the two best in the game, Pikachu and Kirby, who both can get back onto the stage with relative ease in comparison. The character balancing in Smash 64 leaves something to be desired, and not only due to the huge disparity in recovery options. Everyone has at least a handful of zero-to-death combos, so there are no characters that are completely unviable in tournaments, but some characters have less situational combo setups and are generally easier to use in high-level play. Not only are Kirby and Pikachu's combo possibilities virtually endless, but their neutral game is also a step above the rest as well. Kirby's hitboxes are huge and disjointed, and due to multiple jumps he is able to play defensively in a way that is difficult to get around. If you aren't playing Pikachu, there's a good chance you'll have to resort to guesswork to win the neutral game against a Kirby, and that is difficult to do consistently, putting Kirby players at a very natural advantage. Pikachu has the most versatile comboing capabilities in the entire game, possibly the entire series, as well as very high speed, an amazing recovery, and excellent disjoint on his attacks. Pikachu can also mix up aggression and forcing the opponent to approach through his projectile game and fast airspeed. Compare that to a character like Luigi or Samus, and the advantages become very clear. Luigi is slow in the air and so cannot deal with aggression very easily, and the same can be said of Samus. Similarly, they themselves do not have many ways to be aggressive, and if you combine that with their poor recoveries and kill options, the power gap between the best and the worst in the game seems immense. Despite all I have just said, it is often argued that Smash 64 is the most balanced of the competitive Smash games. In a sense, this is definitely true. In no other Smash game will you see as much representation of all the characters in the game at the top level. Mostly, I think this is more of a result of the players having few ways to escape combos rather than the entire roster having a relatively equal amount of tools to work with. The characters in many ways are more asymmetric in their capabilities than any other game in the series, due to the disparity between their abilities being so vast. Kirby's recovery versus Link's recovery is a bit of a joke. Captain Falcon versus Samus's combo ability is night and day. Luigi's speed and aggression compared to Pikachu's is non-existent. This sounds like nitpicking specific attributes, but I do really think the worst characters in the game have next to nothing going for them, and while the best players in the world are capable of doing well with the worst characters in the game, this is something that has been true with every fighting game, and so doesn't sway my view on the matter. Luckily, these abilities and character differences do not exist in a vacuum, and fundamental game mechanics did much to cover up the fact. So while it will never be the case that the best Luigi in the world can consistently beat the best Kirby in the world, the things that make Smash 64 fun will always be open to even the worst characters in the game. Sakurai clearly learned a lot from this game, and he consistently takes feedback from how people play his games and applies it to the next. His goals are to increase the ways that his games can be played, which is reflected heavily in his previous flagship series, Kirby. Like Smash, Kirby is a game in which you are meant to find what you like about the game and stick to it. Both of the games also have a level of accessibility that manages to not inhibit depth. Despite the fact that Sakurai does seem to regret the competitive aspects of the games he makes, when asked directly about what he thinks of them, he responded simply, "I think it's best if people play the way they would like to." Smash 64 is the roughest game in the series by far, but it is also in many ways the most earnest. Despite the lack of budget and limited resources of the Nintendo 64 resulting in a game that could only shadow the full potential of the series, it still managed to capture the hearts of millions of children around the world. To this day, I often hear that Smash 64 is a lot of people's favorites. This doesn't surprise me. It was a defining game in many people's childhood. There's a lot to be said for the simplicity that came from how bare bones it is. The foundation the game laid for the rest of the series defined the genre for years to come, and I commend Sakurai for taking a game that would have likely been very fun, but not particularly charming, and turning it into what is, in my opinion, one of the greatest fighting series ever made. After finishing with Smash 64, Sakurai immediately got to work on the next game in the series, Super Smash Bros. Melee, which will be the subject of my next video.